The Grand Strategic Chamber of the Galactic Council gleamed with the kind of pretentious chrome and holographic displays that screamed, "We take ourselves very seriously." Admiral Vextar of the Zephyrian Empire stood at the center podium, his forearms gesticulating dramatically as he addressed the assembled military minds of 17 different species. His scaled face bore the expression of someone who'd been constipated for 3 solar cycles. "Esteemed colleagues," Vextar began, his voice carrying that particular tone reserved for people who use words like esteemed unironically. "We face our greatest strategic challenge yet. For 47 standard years, the scenario known as the Tri-Front Convergence has remained unsolved." Around the circular chamber, various alien heads nodded with the gravity usually reserved for funeral services. General Klaxon of the Crystalline Hegemony clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Commander Yuki from the Aquatic Federation bubbled something that probably translated to agreement, but sounded like someone gargling mouthwash. The massive holographic display flickered to life, showing a 3-dimensional star map that looked like someone had sneezed glitter across space. Red markers indicated enemy positions, blue showed allied forces, and everything else was colored in that particular shade of, "We're probably doomed." "The simulation presents 3 simultaneous invasions," Vextar continued, warming to his subject like a professor who'd forgotten his audience graduated decades ago. "The hive mind swarm from the galactic north, the tech singularity collective from the eastern spiral arm, and the dimensional raiders phasing in from, well, somewhere else entirely." Strategic Advisor Quilp of the Tentacle Confederation raised what might have been a hand, though it looked more like an angry sea anemone. "Admiral, surely the combined tactical genius of our species can devise a solution. We have collectively studied warfare for millennia." "That's precisely the problem," Vextar replied, managing to sound both pompous and defeated simultaneously. "Our greatest strategic minds have approached this from every conceivable angle. The Zephyrian Battle Academy's top graduates spent 6 months on it. The Crystalline War College devoted an entire semester. Even the notoriously brilliant aquatic deep thinkers emerged from their meditation chambers with nothing but tentacle cramps and a disturbing amount of algae." The chamber fell silent except for the gentle humming of life support systems, and what sounded like General Klaxon's equivalent of nervous throat clearing. "Which brings us," Vextar announced with the dramatic flair of someone about to reveal they'd been adopted, "to our desperate final measure. We have issued invitations to every known intelligent species in the galaxy, even the ones we usually pretend don't exist at diplomatic functions." A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Commander Yuki's bubbling increased to what could only be described as agitated carbonation. "You don't mean—" Strategic Advisor Quilp's tentacles writhed with what was either excitement or horror. "Yes," Vextar confirmed grimly. "We've even invited the humans." 3 standard hours later, the Grand Strategic Chamber had been transformed into what could generously be called a cultural experience, and more accurately described as barely controlled chaos. Representatives from 43 different species had arrived, each more convinced of their own tactical superiority than the last. The methane breathers had set up an elaborate atmospheric tent that smelled like a combination of rotten eggs and burnt rubber. The silicon-based collective had constructed what appeared to be a small mountain of thinking rocks. The energy beings flickered in and out of visible light spectrum, which was both impressive and incredibly annoying for anyone trying to take attendance. Admiral Vextar was in the middle of explaining the gravity of their situation when the chamber's main entrance hissed open with all the dramatic flair of a theatrical smoke machine. Everyone turned expectantly, prepared to witness the arrival of humanity's greatest strategic mind. Instead, they got Jake Morrison. Jake stumbled through the doorway, wearing a wrinkled delivery uniform that read Tony's Pizza Palace and carrying a thermal bag that had definitely seen better decades. His brown hair stuck up at odd angles, and he had the glazed expression of someone who'd been driving for 12 hours straight and had somehow ended up in a different galaxy entirely. "Ah," Jake said, looking around at the assembled alien dignitaries with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just realized they'd walked into the wrong classroom during finals week. "This isn't the space station food court, is it?" The chamber fell silent. 43 species worth of advanced military minds stared at this creature that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and questionable life choices. "You are the human representative?" General Klaxon's mandibles clicked in what was either confusion or the crystalline equivalent of a nervous breakdown. "Representative of what now?" Jake set down his thermal bag and scratched his head. "Look, I just took a wrong turn at that spinning thing with all the lights, and my GPS started speaking in what I think was ancient Sumerian. I'm supposed to be delivering a large pepperoni to some guy named Zorblat on Deck 7. Commander Yuki's bubbling reached panic levels. Strategic Advisor Quilp's tentacles were making gestures that probably violated several galactic decency laws. Admiral Vexstar, to his credit, managed to maintain his composure despite the fact that his carefully planned military summit had just been crashed by what appeared to be a lost food delivery service employee. "Perhaps there has been some misunderstanding," Vexstar said slowly, the way people speak to small children and apparently confused humans. "We sent an invitation to Earth's Strategic Command, requesting their finest military tactician." "Yeah, I wouldn't know anything about that," Jake replied, opening his thermal bag and pulling out what was unmistakably a 20-sided die. "I was just finishing up my route so I could get home for D&D night. Speaking of which, do you guys have Wi-Fi? Because my phone's been trying to connect to something called Galactic Network Prime for the last hour, and I'm pretty sure that's going to cost me like $1,000 in roaming charges." The die rolled across the polished floor of the chamber, coming to rest with a natural 20 facing up. Several alien species took this as either a good omen or a declaration of war. D&D? Strategic Advisor Quilp's tentacles formed what might have been a question mark. Is this some form of human tactical designation? Jake blinked. "Dungeons and Dragons. You know, tabletop role-playing game. I run a campaign every Tuesday night for my buddies. Pretty basic stuff, really. We're currently trying to figure out how to assault a lich's fortress while dealing with an orc invasion and a dragon that keeps showing up at the worst possible times." The assembled military geniuses exchanged glances that conveyed roughly 17 different emotions, none of them positive. "So you're saying," Admiral Vexstar said carefully, "that you have experience with multi-front tactical scenarios." "Well, yeah, but that's just for fun. It's not like it's actual strategy or anything." Admiral Vexstar decided that since they'd already invited 43 species and achieved absolutely nothing, they might as well let the confused pizza delivery humans stick around. At worst, he reasoned, it would provide an entertaining distraction from their impending strategic failure. "Very well," Vexstar announced with the resignation of someone about to explain quantum physics to a goldfish. "Let us proceed with the scenario presentation." The holographic display expanded to fill the entire chamber, transforming the space into a three-dimensional battlefield that would have been impressive if it wasn't so thoroughly depressing. Jake whistled appreciatively and immediately started walking around the display like he was browsing at an electronics store. "Okay, so here's the deal," Vexstar began, pointing at the red markers with one of his forearms while the other three gestured dramatically. "The hive mind swarm approaches from galactic north. Imagine, if you will, billions of creatures sharing a single consciousness, coordinating their attacks with perfect precision, and possessing the collective intelligence of approximately 12 trillion individual minds." "That's a lot of hit points," Jake muttered, squinting at the swarm indicators. "Hit points." General Claxon's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Never mind, keep going." Vexstar continued, clearly warming to his subject in the way that people do when they're about to explain exactly how doomed everyone is. "From the Eastern Spiral Arm, we have the Tech Singularity Collective. They've achieved perfect fusion of organic and artificial intelligence, can adapt to any strategy in real time, and their weapons literally rewrite the laws of physics as needed." "So they're basically cheating," Jake observed, nodding sagely. "I hate players like that." "Players?" Commander Yuki's bubbling took on a distinctly agitated tone. "And finally," Vexstar pressed on, apparently deciding to ignore Jake's increasingly bizarre commentary, "the dimensional raiders phase in from parallel realities. They exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, can attack from angles that don't technically exist, and their very presence causes local space-time to have what our scientists call a really bad day." Jake had stopped walking and was now staring at the display with the expression of someone trying to solve a particularly tricky math problem. "So let me get this straight. You've got a hive mind that shares information instantly, tech guys who can change the rules mid-game, and interdimensional beings who can basically attack from anywhere." "Precisely." Strategic Advisor Quilp's tentacles writhed with what might have been excitement. "And they're all coordinating their assault to hit our primary defensive positions simultaneously. The Hive provides overwhelming numbers, the Collective neutralizes our technological advantages, and the Raiders ensure we can't retreat or regroup." "Right, and what have you guys tried so far?" The chamber fell uncomfortably quiet. Admiral Vexstar's scales took on a slightly greenish tinge. "Well," he began slowly, "the Zephyrian approach involved a complex 17-phase defensive matrix with rotating fallback positions and coordinated counterstrikes." "How'd that work out?" "We were completely destroyed in the first engagement." The crystalline hegemony proposed a mathematically perfect resource allocation strategy, General Claxon added helpfully, optimized for maximum efficiency across all fronts. And? Also completely destroyed, but very efficiently. Jake nodded thoughtfully, walking around the display again. What about you, Bubble folks? Commander Yuki's response sounded like someone gargling with enthusiasm, the translation device helpfully provided. We attempted a fluid defensive strategy based on adaptive response patterns and emergent tactical solutions. Let me guess, completely destroyed. Most thoroughly. Jake stopped walking and looked around at the assembled alien minds with something approaching sympathy. Okay, so here's my question. Do you guys have, character sheets for these enemy factions? What are their actual stats? What are they trying to accomplish besides just winning? And please tell me someone around here has some dice, because I'm starting to get some ideas, but I need to know what we're actually working with. The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for moments when someone asks a question so fundamentally different that it breaks everyone's brain a little bit. Character sheets? Admiral Vextar repeated slowly. Yeah, you know. What are their strengths, weaknesses, motivations, preferred tactics? What do they actually want? Because in my experience, the best way to win isn't to fight harder. It's to figure out what your opponents don't expect, and then do something completely different. Strategic Advisor Quilp's tentacles formed what was definitely a question mark this time. Are you suggesting we should not fight them? Oh, we're definitely going to fight them, Jake said cheerfully, rolling his 20-sided die again. But first I need to know the house rules. What happened next would go down in galactic military history as either the most brilliant tactical breakthrough in centuries, or the moment when interstellar warfare officially jumped the shark. Jake spent the next 20 minutes asking questions that made the assembled strategic minds question not only their tactical training, but possibly their life choices. Questions like, what happens if the hive mind gets conflicting information? And, do the tech guys actually think for themselves, or just optimize? And, how do the dimensional raiders decide which reality to attack from? Admiral Vextar had started developing what appeared to be a nervous tic in his left eye. I fail to see how these philosophical inquiries relate to military strategy. Oh, they're not philosophical, Jake replied, now sitting cross-legged on the chamber floor with his die, completely oblivious to the fact that he was treating a galactic war council like his living room. See, in D&D, you never attack the dragon head-on. That's what the dragon expects. Instead, you figure out what the dragon actually wants. Then you either give it to them in a way that screws them over, or you make them think someone else is trying to take it. General Claxon's mandibles were clicking so rapidly they sounded like a broken air conditioner. Are you suggesting we negotiate with genocidal invasion forces? Nah, negotiation's boring. I'm talking about something way better. Jake grinned with the expression of someone who'd just figured out how to min-max a character build. I'm talking about getting them to fight each other instead of us. The chamber erupted in the alien equivalent of horrified gasps. Strategic Advisor Quilp's tentacles formed what was definitely an exclamation point. Commander Yuki's bubbling reached levels that probably violated several noise ordinances. That's impossible, Admiral Vextar declared. These factions have been coordinating their assault for decades. Their timing is perfect, their strategies are complementary, their egos are huge, Jake interrupted cheerfully. Think about it. You've got the hive mind who thinks they're the smartest because they can process information from billions of sources. You've got the tech collective who think they're superior because they can adapt to anything. And you've got the dimensional raiders who probably think reality itself belongs to them. These aren't allies. They're three different flavors of supremacists who are temporarily working together. Jake stood up and walked over to the holographic display, pointing at the enemy formations with the casual confidence of someone explaining why pineapple belongs on pizza. Look at their attack patterns. The hive is coming straight at your strongest positions because they want to prove they can overwhelm anything. The tech guys are targeting your most advanced systems because they want to show off their superiority. And the raiders are attacking from impossible angles because they want everyone to know how special they are. But their coordination, General Claxon began weakly, is probably being managed by whoever convinced the other two to work together in the first place. And I'm betting none of them actually trust each other. So here's what we're going to do. Jake picked up his die and rolled it again. Natural 18. The aliens were starting to take this as a very ominous sign. First, we're going to feed the hive some information that makes them think the tech collective is planning to double-cross them and absorb their consciousness. Which, let's be honest, the tech guys probably are planning to do eventually anyway. Strategic Advisor Quilp's tentacles had gone completely rigid. You want to lie to them? It's not lying if it's probably true. Second, we're going to let the Dimensional Raiders discover that the other two factions are planning to use their combined forces to seal off the parallel dimensions and claim this reality as their exclusive territory. But that would... Commander Yuki's bubbling had reached frequencies that were making several species' ears hurt. Make them all paranoid about each other? Yeah, that's the point. See, the beautiful thing about supremacists is that they already think everyone else is plotting against them. We're just going to confirm their suspicions. Admiral Vextar was staring at Jake with the expression of someone watching a traffic accident in slow motion. This is completely unprecedented. Military doctrine clearly states that... Military doctrine assumes your enemies are reasonable, Jake interrupted, rolling his die yet again. 19 this time. But these guys aren't reasonable. They're predictable. The Hive thinks in terms of overwhelming force, the tech guys think in terms of optimization, and the Raiders think in terms of dimensional superiority, so we give each of them exactly what they expect to see, just not from the direction they're expecting to see it from. Jake walked around the display again, this time with the confident stride of someone who'd just figured out the perfect character build. We make the Hive think the tech collective is trying to hack their shared consciousness. We make the tech guys think the Raiders are using dimensional physics to corrupt their systems. And we make the Raiders think the other two are working together to collapse their access points. This is insane, whispered General Claxon. This is Tuesday night, Jake replied cheerfully. Last week my players had to deal with a lich, a dragon, and an army of orcs who were all technically working together, but kept trying to backstab each other for the magic artifacts. Same principle, bigger scale. He rolled his die one more time. Natural 20. Besides, Jake added with a grin, what's the worst that could happen? If it doesn't work, you all get wiped out exactly like you were going to anyway. But if it does work... He gestured at the holographic battlefield with the casual confidence of someone who just proposed the most audacious con job in galactic history. We turned the biggest coordinated invasion in galactic history into the biggest three-way fight since my last campaign ended with the Paladin, the Rogue, and the Wizard all trying to claim the same legendary sword. The silence that followed was so complete that you could hear the life support systems humming, General Claxon's nervous mandible clicking, and what sounded suspiciously like Admiral Vextar having an existential crisis. All right, Jake announced, clapping his hands together with the enthusiasm of someone about to start the best D&D session of their life. Time to roll for initiative. Who's got access to your intelligence networks? What followed was either the most brilliant military operation in galactic history, or the most elaborate prank ever pulled on 3 different dimensions simultaneously. Jake had somehow convinced 43 different species to participate in what he cheerfully referred to as the most epic campaign I've ever run. Okay, so here's how this works, Jake explained, standing in front of the holographic display like a dungeon master addressing his players. The crystalline hegemony is going to intercept and modify Hive communications. General Claxon, I need you to make it look like the tech collective is attempting to infiltrate their shared consciousness network. General Claxon's mandibles clicked uncertainly. But won't they detect the deception? Not if we make it look like the tech guys are using their reality adaptation protocols to mask the intrusion. See, we're not going to send fake information. We're going to send real tech collective code signatures, doing exactly what the Hive would expect them to do, just not for the reasons they think. Jake turned to Commander Yuki, whose bubbling had reached what could generously be called cautiously optimistic carbonation. The Aquatic Federation gets to handle the tech collective. I need you to create interference patterns that look exactly like dimensional phase shifts corrupting their adaptive algorithms. But that would require us to actually understand dimensional physics, Commander Yuki protested, her translation device barely keeping up with her agitated bubbling. No, it would require you to make noise that looks like dimensional physics. The beauty of the tech collective is that they'll analyze any anomaly to death. Give them something that appears to be dimensionally influenced but doesn't quite make sense, and they'll spend so much processing power trying to figure it out that they'll convince themselves the Raiders are screwing with them. Strategic Advisor Quilp's tentacles were forming increasingly complex geometric patterns. And the Dimensional Raiders? Oh, they're the fun ones, Jake grinned, rolling his die again. 17. The energy beings are going to create resonance patterns across multiple dimensional frequencies. Nothing harmful, just enough to make it look like someone's trying to seal their access routes. The Raiders will detect the patterns, trace them back to collaborative efforts between the Hive and Tech factions, and assume it's a coordinated attempt to lock them out of this reality. Admiral Vextar had been silent for several minutes, staring at Jake with the expression of someone watching their entire understanding of warfare get tossed out an airlock. You're essentially running 3 separate psychological operations simultaneously. 4, actually, Jake corrected cheerfully. We're also going to make each faction think the other 2 have been planning this betrayal from the beginning. See, paranoid supremacists don't just get suspicious, they get retrospectively suspicious. They'll start reinterpreting everything that's happened as evidence of the conspiracy they just discovered. The next 6 hours unfolded like the most complex tabletop campaign ever attempted. Except instead of dice and character sheets, they were using actual military intelligence networks and the combined technological capabilities of 43 different species. Jake coordinated the entire operation with the casual confidence of someone managing a particularly elaborate dinner party. Okay, Zephyrine Fleet, I need you to accidentally broadcast on frequencies the Hive will intercept. Make it sound like you're coordinating with tech collective vessels about something called consciousness integration protocols. But there are no such protocols, Admiral Vexstar protested. Exactly. The Hive will think it's code for something secret. Paranoid species love thinking they've uncovered secret codes. Meanwhile, Silicon-based collective, start transmitting mathematical equations that are almost but not quite solutions to dimensional barrier problems. The tech guys will think you're working with the Raiders on dimensional manipulation. General Claxon watched in fascination as his carefully crafted communications created exactly the chaos Jake had predicted. The hive mind is beginning to show signs of agitation. Their formation patterns are becoming more defensive. Perfect. How about our tech friends? Commander Yuki's bubbling had taken on what could only be described as gleeful tones. The tech collective has redirected 17% of their processing power to analyzing our dimensional interference patterns. Their adaptive protocols are beginning to show stress indicators. And the Raiders? One of the energy beings flickered into visible spectrum long enough to convey what the translation systems interpreted as smug satisfaction. The dimensional Raiders have begun reinforcing their access points and have redirected their scout forces to investigate collateral positions between the other 2 factions. Jake rolled his die again. Natural 20. At this point, several alien species were starting to worship the small, plastic polyhedron. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted non-binary energy matrices, Jake announced with the tone of someone about to reveal the final plot twist. Welcome to the endgame. Each faction now believes the other 2 are actively betraying them. They're all going to do exactly what supremacists do when they think they're being conspired against. Which is? Admiral Vexstar asked, though his tone suggested he was beginning to suspect the answer. They're going to strike first, strike hard, and assume everyone else is an enemy. Watch the display. The holographic battlefield began to shift as 3 massive invasion fleets, perfectly coordinated just hours before, started turning on each other with the fury of players who just discovered their party members had been planning to murder them for their magic items. The hive mind swarm, convinced that the tech collective was attempting to absorb their consciousness, launched a massive preemptive strike against the collective's adaptive networks. The tech collective, certain that both other factions were collaborating against them, began systematically targeting hive communications and Raider dimensional access points. The dimensional Raiders, convinced they were about to be locked out of reality itself, began phasing their entire invasion force into combat positions against their former allies. Jake watched the chaos unfold with the satisfied expression of a dungeon master whose players had just walked directly into his perfectly laid trap. You know what the best part is? They're all fighting so hard against each other that they've completely forgotten about us. Strategic advisor Quilp's tentacles had formed what was unmistakably a victory sign. The primary invasion routes are completely compromised. They're not even attempting to attack our positions anymore. That's because we're not the main characters in their story anymore, Jake explained, settling back to watch the show. We're just the prize they'll fight over after they deal with their real enemies. Except by the time they finish dealing with each other, there won't be enough left of any of them to be a threat to anyone. Admiral Vexstar stared at the display, showing 3 galaxy-threatening invasion forces tearing each other apart with increasing fury. How did you know this would work? Jake shrugged and rolled his die one final time. Natural 20, because apparently the universe had a sense of humor. Easy. I've been running D&D games for 8 years. This is exactly what happens when you put 3 min-maxed power gamers in the same campaign and tell them there's only one legendary artifact. 3 days later, the holographic display showed the aftermath of what military historians would eventually call the Great Galactic Tantrum of 2387. The hive mind swarm had been reduced to scattered clusters, arguing among themselves about whether they'd been betrayed by their own collective consciousness. The Tech Singularity Collective had split into 17 different sub-factions, each convinced they were the only ones who hadn't been compromised by dimensional interference. The dimensional raiders had retreated to whatever parallel reality they'd come from, but not before sealing their access points so thoroughly that they'd accidentally locked themselves out of this dimension entirely. Jake sat in the center of the Grand Strategic Chamber, surrounded by 43 different species of military leaders who were staring at him with expressions ranging from awe to existential terror to what appeared to be religious reverence. "So," Admiral Vextar said slowly, his voice carrying the tone of someone trying to process information that had fundamentally broken their understanding of reality, "in the span of 72 standard hours, you have neutralized the 3 greatest military threats in galactic history, using nothing but misinformation, psychological manipulation, and what you call basic dungeon master skills." "Well, when you put it like that, it sounds way more impressive than it actually was," Jake replied, checking his phone for the time and frowning at the display that still read, "Galactic Network Prime, roaming charges a pay." "Honestly, it was easier than last week's session when my players spent 4 hours arguing about whether to trust the obviously evil merchant who was definitely going to betray them." General Claxon's mandibles had been clicking in a steady rhythm for the past hour, which the translation systems indicated was the crystalline equivalent of nervous laughter. But the strategic complexity, the coordination required, the precise timing. "Look, guys, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but it really wasn't that complicated," Jake said, standing up and stretching. "You just have to remember that every character, even the villains, thinks they're the hero of their own story. The Hive thought they were bringing order to chaos. The tech guys thought they were optimizing the universe. The Raiders thought they were liberating reality from linear thinking. None of them could imagine that someone else might be smarter or more capable than them." Strategic Advisor Quilp's tentacles formed what was definitely a question mark, followed by several exclamation points. "But how did you know they would react so predictably?" Jake shrugged and pocketed his 20-sided die. "Because I've dealt with power gamers before. They're all the same, whether they're sitting around a table arguing about spell components or commanding galaxy-spanning invasion fleets. They're so focused on proving they're the best that they forget other people might be playing a completely different game." Commander Yuki's bubbling had reached what could only be described as philosophical frequencies. "Are you saying that warfare is a game to humans?" "Not warfare exactly," Jake clarified, picking up his thermal bag and checking to make sure his pizza delivery supplies were still intact. "But the psychology behind it? Yeah, that's pretty universal. Bullies, supremacists, power-hungry megalomaniacs. They all follow the same basic patterns, whether they're trying to steal lunch money or conquer galaxies. They're predictable because they can't imagine anyone being clever enough to outsmart them." Admiral Vextar had been silent for several minutes, staring at the holographic display showing the scattered remains of 3 invasion fleets. "The Galactic Council will want to offer you a position as strategic advisor. The resources we could provide, the challenges we could present." "Yeah, that's really flattering and all," Jake interrupted, "but I need to get going. My Tuesday night group is expecting me, and if I'm late again, Marcus is going to throw a fit about having to reschedule around his work schedule. Plus, I still have a pizza delivered to some guy named Zorblat, and Tony's has a strict policy about customer satisfaction." The chamber fell silent, except for the gentle humming of life support systems and what sounded like 43 different species, trying to process the fact that the savior of galactic civilization was more concerned about pizza delivery schedules than military glory. "But surely," General Claxon began desperately, "you could stay long enough to document your methods, to train our strategists in your techniques." Jake paused at the chamber entrance and looked back at the assembled military minds with something approaching sympathy. "Here's the thing, guys. You don't need to learn my techniques. You just need to stop thinking like military strategists." "What do you mean?" Admiral Vextar asked. "You're all so focused on fighting the perfect battle that you forgot the point isn't to fight perfectly. The point is to win, and sometimes the best way to win is to convince your enemies to lose for you." Jake grinned and rolled his die one last time. Natural 20, because apparently the universe was committed to the bit. "Besides," he added cheerfully, "this was actually easier than most of my campaigns. At least these guys stayed in character the whole time. Last month I had a player try to seduce a dragon, convince a lich to become a life coach, and somehow turn the final boss fight into an impromptu cooking competition." As Jake walked toward the exit, Strategic Advisor Quilp called out desperately, "But what if something like this happens again? What if we face another coordinated threat?" Jake paused and looked back with the expression of someone who is about to impart the greatest wisdom of their generation. Then you remember that every story has a weakness, every character has a flaw, and every plan falls apart the moment someone does something completely unexpected. Also, it helps if you have a really good 20-sided die. The chamber doors hissed shut behind him, leaving 43 species worth of military geniuses staring at the spot where a pizza delivery driver had just casually redefined the nature of galactic warfare. Admiral Vextar was the first to break the silence. Did anyone else get the feeling that he was holding back? General Claxon's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. What do you mean? He kept saying this was easier than his usual games. If this was easy for him, Vextar's scales took on a slightly greenish tinge. What exactly are humans capable of when they're actually trying? Outside the chamber, Jake Morrison walked through the corridors of the Galactic Space Station, whistling a tune and checking his GPS, which had finally stopped speaking ancient Sumerian and was now providing helpful directions to Deck 7. He had a pizza to deliver, a D&D session to run, and absolutely no idea that he'd just convinced the entire galactic community that humanity might be the most terrifyingly unpredictable species in the known universe. Which, considering the kind of shenanigans his Tuesday night group got up to on a regular basis, was probably a pretty fair assessment.